Today we're going to talk about yet another film camera in the Canon lineup, the Canon EOS Elan IIe. This model was released in 1995 and was geared towards the semi-pro or the serious hobbyist market. There was film cameras above this in the Canon line and then a lot below this as well. Since I'm reviewing these cameras in context to the way I use them and in context to other film camera options, the pros and cons list are very different now than they might have been when the camera was originally released. A lot of these EOS cameras that I review have a lot more positives than negatives in my mind, and a lot of that is due to value, because they are now priced so low that you get a lot of camera for your dollar. So let's go through a few of the negatives or downsides. So the few negatives on this camera include the fact that it's lacking spot metering, which is my favorite way to meter when I'm out doing city scenes, even landscapes. I like to use spot metering and choose spots to get my measurement from, and then decide my aperture and shutter speed from there. You can be really precise with spot metering, and you can find a specific spot on the ground. You can easily spot meter to your hand if you're trying to get like a skin tone metering reference. So this not having spot metering is a little bit of a bummer, but all in all, not that big of a deal. Another small negative in comparison to digital cameras, DSLRs, or even some film photography cameras is the fact that the max shutter speed on this model only goes up to 1/4000th of a second. That's pretty much all you need for most photography, and even some digital cameras nowadays only go up to 1/4000th, but a lot of cameras do go up to 1/8000th of a second, giving that one extra stop of flexibility, so you can either accommodate with aperture adjustment, or if you just need that speed to catch a super fast motion or whatnot, having that sometimes is handy. I don't go up to that shutter speed all the time. Sometimes it's just a psychological thing, knowing that it's nice to have if it is there. But if you need that, then that's one thing to keep in mind with this camera. This maxes out at 1/4000th. Another downside to this camera is the fact that it only has 3 autofocus points. But just like any other feature on a camera like this, you have to take it into context to when it was released. Since this wasn't the top of the line camera, it wasn't gonna get the same amount of features as the Canon EOS 1 or 1N. That was the top of the line at the time. But so 3 was the standard for anything below the 1N. And for me, only 3 autofocus points is not that big a deal. Most of the time I'm using the center autofocus point anyways. But if there are situations where you need a whole bunch of autofocus points and you're used to that, especially now with mirrorless when autofocus points pretty much fill the frame, this is going to be an adjustment for you. But if you learn how to focus, recompose, or if you do that already, it's really not that big a deal. But only 3 autofocus points is another feature to keep in mind if you expect more. Another negative that is pretty small is the no depth of field preview button. It's not really a huge deal, but whenever a camera does have it, I find myself using it from time to time. So let's get into the positives. There was a handful of features on this camera and aspects about it that I was pleasantly surprised by. I had ordered it online, not having ever held it, but I knew that the price was so good that I felt it was a safe gamble, and plus I knew I wanted to make a video about it. But right off the bat, I was surprised by the build quality. Yes, it is the classic Canon plastic, semi-plastic body, or at least the body outside, and some plastic elements. But this does have a very solid build to it. And you can see on this model, the silver parts of it, they do feel metal. I'm actually not quite sure if it is, but I think it is. But that gives the body a really good solid feel. It gives it a little bit of weight, but not too heavy. So I was surprised how solid it feels, if that makes sense. I was also pleasantly surprised by the depth of the grip. Oftentimes with the quote-unquote lower end cameras, the grip size is a little small, and so that makes it feel a little different in the hand than when you're used to having a camera with a deeper grip. Another positive is the viewfinder. The viewfinder is a decent size. It feels, it doesn't feel small. It's very clear. The autofocus points are very easy to see. There's the classic circle in the middle for the partial metering size, and at the bottom you have what I would expect from an EOS film camera. You have your shutter speed, aperture, feedback, and your exposure scale, which, just like I've talked about with in other videos, the exposure scale in the viewfinder is one of my favorite features on the EOS film cameras, something that we're used to now on almost every camera that you buy digitally, mirrorless or DSLR. Another positive that I was not surprised by, but it's worth mentioning because this is one of the features that a camera like this has that maybe the Rebel G didn't have, is the command dial on the back, which by default the dial on the back controls your aperture, and the dial by the shutter controls, and the dial by the shutter button controls the shutter speed. So you can operate the camera with one hand very easily, just like with most Canon DSLRs now, and with a lot of mirrorless cameras. So that dial on the back is something I've been very used to, and I'm glad that this one has it. It makes it very easy to use. Another feature that this has that I use all the time on other cameras is the ability to switch the autofocus function to a back button. So I can look through there and press that button with my thumb and get the autofocus to activate, which you can do on almost every Canon DSLR, but that was not the case with every film SLR that they made. So it's nice to have that in this model. This camera has 3 metering options, pretty standard for a lot of the SLRs that were released, but it has evaluative metering, which is essentially most of the screen. It has center weighted average metering and partial metering. And the partial metering on this, I think, is 9% or a little over 9% of the screen. It's that pretty much that little circle in the center of the viewfinder. One positive about this that shouldn't have been a surprise because I could look at the pictures online, but once I got it and played with it, I started to think about it. It's nice that the meter options and some of the other options on this camera are switched on and off by actual switches and dials. Like the metering options here, the high-speed shooting, continuous shooting options here, the autofocus options here are all actual switches and dials. And even obviously, since it has this program mode dial that we're used to, you can switch between manual aperture priority and shutter priority with the dial as well. So having switches and dials is very, very, very unique for a Canon camera, whether that's film or digital. And this Elan series is kind of an anomaly in that aspect. This is pretty much the only set of cameras in this series that has that many switches and dials for those options. So that's something that's kind of cool with the Elan. So overall, I was just surprised how comfortable I felt with this model, this Elan camera. I've owned an Elan before, but not this specific one. It was the Elan 7. I kind of regret selling it, but this one gives me pretty much all the positives that I liked from that Elan 7 for the most part. And I don't know, I'd have to compare it, but this one actually may feel like it's built a little bit better, actually. I'm not quite sure. That's just kind of going by memory. But my shooting experience with this is really, really good. I don't feel shorted in any way. I have to get used to the fact that I'm partial metering and not spot metering sometimes, so I have to be aware of that. But other than that, this is a very, very capable camera. And if you get this and add a lens like the Nifty 50 or any other EF lens, you're going to be able to do pretty much anything with it. I had a very, very good shooting experience with this camera. My main film cameras are the EOS 1N, and now recently I've acquired the EOS 3. This won't take the place of those for me, but here's the thing, this is easier to find than those cameras are, and cheaper almost every single time. You can find this on the used market between $35 to $60. If you see it for much more than that, I'd say be patient and keep an eye out for something around the $60 range. At $60, this camera is a great value. You add some good glass and some awesome film stock, and you have a really killer film photography setup. We all would love a Leica or a really killer mechanical manual focus film camera, and there's nothing wrong with using those if you have access to those, but not everyone does. So looking out for options like this is something that I always do, and I encourage other people to do. Again, $60 for this killer camera body that you can slap amazing glass on and shoot pretty much anything you want to shoot. When I was out shooting with it, it felt like I was shooting with any other good quality Canon SLR. So I felt very at home with it, with that command dial on the back button autofocus, the viewfinder with the data that's in there that I expect. I felt right at home with it in my bag. If you choose the Elan camera as your entry into the film photography world, it's going to be a great choice, and it's going to be a camera that you can keep forever and shoot a lot of great things with it. So I'm going to be making more videos about the EOS film camera lineup. This is one of them. Please like and subscribe. Check out my other videos that I've done so far. Share with me any other camera that you might want me to review or talk about, and I'll try to get those and shoot with them and see what they're about. So until next time, see you later.